listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom, and welcome to this week's episode of SLA Insights. My name is Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and I'm going to continue the discussion that I began a couple weeks ago on comprehensible input and its relevance and really necessity for language acquisition. In more recent episodes, I've been talking about ways to increase the quantity of comprehensible input in the classroom, particularly focused on the spoken input that you can provide to students through an immersion environment in the classroom, and as a subset of that, TPR, or total physical response. Today, I'm going to focus more on the reading form of input, written input, and how you might increase the quantity of that in your classroom through a strategy called extensive reading. And what it is really reading large quantities of texts at the student's level of ability. Second language acquisition research has done a number of studies and confirmed that 95 to 98% is the ideal. In other words, you want the students to be reading texts in which they know 95 to 98% of the words in that text. So we're not talking about struggling through a passage where a student has to look up every other word. That's a lot. Students need to know a lot, and for two reasons. If they're at 95 to 98% coverage of a text, then they can comprehend it. Anything less than that means they may or may not comprehend it. And second, at that level of coverage, 95 to 98%, the student can acquire the other 2 to 5% that they don't know. This goes back to the input hypothesis in Creation's I+1. If the students are at 95 to 98% coverage in the text that they're reading, that means they're probably at I+1. If you take it down even to 90%, you've moved out of that I+1 into I+2, I+3, whatever, something that's not going to be as effective for them in their learning process. So they want to be reading large quantities of text for extensive reading, but they also need to be reading it at their level. And again, 95 to 98% seems to be the magic numbers here. And then the why. Why would we do this? Well, as I said, to increase the quantity of comprehensible input, and now in written form. And this is because most of our ancient language classes are focused on reading ancient texts. So you want to promote, another reason for doing this is also to promote reading fluency, where you increase the student's speed of reading and their accuracy in their reading. In a few weeks, I want to talk more about reading and reading fluency and reading strategies, and we'll talk a little bit more of how that comes into play. But fluency in reading, that is speed and accuracy, is also going to help their comprehension. So the question then is how? How do we do this? How do we provide large quantities of reading for the students? One of the best ways to do this is to start collecting resources, reading materials, books, articles in the target language, and have them at various levels. So what you're going to want to do is label each item based on its vocabulary and or grammatical difficulty. If a student at, say, week 3 can read the particular item, whatever it is, at 95 to 98%, then you can label it as week 3 or chapter 3 or whatever, gauging how well the students know that. And ideally labeling each of the reading items you have in your collection. And then you want to assign a target for the student. This can be, for example, the number of pages or the number of words you want them to read in a given week or in a given day. You could also put it as time on task. In other words, the number of minutes or hours spent per day, per week, per semester. But give them a target. How much do you want them to read? And make it make it so they're doing it regularly, every day or 5 days a week if possible. So then once you've given the target, then you need to provide some time for them to do that. Sometimes in class, you may want to carve out 10 minutes of class time for them to do some of their extensive reading. But then you could also allow them to borrow books from your collection to take with them for homework. And then ultimately, you're going to need to provide incentives for them to do the reading. The easiest one is a grade in the grade book. If they completed their 20 minutes a day or whatever it is you've assigned them, then they get an A or whatever. But you could also do fun things like competitions, see who can read the most in a given time, maybe some special tangible rewards like food or something fun like that. But you need to give them a reason to complete the assignment. Now, this seems maybe even a little far-fetched. We don't do this typically in our ancient language classrooms, but elementary schools do this all the time as students learn to read their native language. They require them to read a certain amount of time every day to come home. I remember filling out a chart with my daughter in second, third grade. They read their 10 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it was every day. They got rewards after they've completed so many books or so many days per minute reading. And there's a whole system out there through the Accelerated Reader Program that will rate each book on difficulty level. For example, a book might be given a 2.4. That means second grade, fourth month. A student at that level, it's expected a student at that point in time can read this book. They might be rated based on vocabulary level. They're also rated on their interest. For example, even though this might be a 3.5 for a third grader, but the interest level really has more to do with a fifth grader. It's something a fifth grader might be more interested in. And the Accelerated Reader Program also offers quizzes on each book, sometimes more than one type of quiz per book. Reading practice quiz, a literacy skills quiz, a vocabulary practice skills. Now, this is ideal, and I know may seem far-fetched at this point, but I would love to see us in 5 or 10 years in the ancient languages have a system in place that's very similar to this, where we have enough materials and the materials are rated and weighted, have quizzes to go with them to provide accountability for having completed that particular item or whatever. And so that leads me then to our challenges right now. We just really have a lack of simple text for beginners. And I've mentioned this before. We need more graded readers. For Latin, for example, we do have some more simple texts that are out there and available. A lot more than for Biblical Hebrew or Biblical Greek. Glossa House has put together some for Greek, some look like children's books, 50 words for learning body vocabulary or things like that. And I know that there's some coming down the pipe for Hebrew. I've had some conversations just in the last month with publishers and individuals who are pulling together and starting to create these readers, but more are necessary. So this is a challenge to where we are right now. Hopefully more will come, but there also keep in mind there are some introductory textbooks that include simple made-up sentences. Most of them do not have full stories, though, so we're really looking for the stories because our brains are hardwired for story. We want to do more than just isolated sentences. We want the whole story from beginning to end. So the lack of text and lack of resources is one challenge to putting together this type of extensive reading program that I'm describing. Another challenge is we didn't learn it this way. For most of us who did Hebrew, or Greek, or Latin, this wasn't modeled for us. So we aren't sure how to do it. We might not be sure if it'll work. The research says it does, and so I would encourage us to explore it and move in, really try to develop those resources and set up some extensive reading programs for our ancient language classrooms. So in spite of the challenges, I'd like to offer a little bit of encouragement. First, as I said, there are some resources coming. They're being developed. It may take some time, a year, 2 years, 5 years, to get a quantity of resources to develop the kind of program I'm talking about. But that doesn't mean you can't find or create your own. Start with what you have. Again, use what you can, do what you can to provide extensive reading for your students. And again, my hope is we will have enough resources in the coming years to start developing this type of program more thoroughly. So in conclusion, I've been talking about extensive reading and the need for extensive reading as a means of providing a large quantity of comprehensible input to your students. This is along with the other forms of increasing quantity of comprehensible input through immersion in the classroom and TPR, total physical response. So this kind of wraps up today the last bit of the increasing quantity of comprehensible input. In the next episode, I'm going to start talking about increasing the quality of comprehensible input. How do we manipulate that input in a way that best promotes acquisition for our students? So I hope you can join me for upcoming episodes. In the meantime, have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.